Good evening, everyone. My name is Sharma. I'm your host again on Get to Know. And in this series, we get into the lives of the people around us and just have conversations with them, walk on a journey with them, and get to know them a little bit better. And today, we're privileged to have a wonderful guest in the set with us, Celina Grant. Celina wears many hats. She is a singer, she's an author, she's a well-being consultant, she is a mental health nurse, she's a therapist, and many other things. And above all, she's a child of God. So Celina, welcome to the set, and we're happy to have you here.
Thank you, Sis Sharma. It's lovely to be here. Really, really happy to be here. Excited, nervous, but excited.
Okay, I must say you look lovely today.
Thank you, as do you.
All right, thank you. So I'm just going to get to it, and I will ask you just a little bit about yourself. If you would just go ahead and tell me who is Celina, how would you describe yourself?
Okay, so yeah, as you've mentioned, I have a few different hats. As you've mentioned, I'm currently work as a wellbeing consultant. I'm originally or initially, my core training is as a mental health nurse. So I trained as a mental health nurse first. I went on and trained as a cognitive behaviour therapist, CBT therapist. I also trained as a counsellor before I'd done my nursing and went back to it again after my nursing as well. And then the last bit of studies I'd done was a master's in mental health. So I recently went self-employed, full-time self-employed, 2 years ago now, 2 years ago in October. So I gave myself the title, I'm self-titled wellbeing consultant. I tried to find a title that captured all my studies and my degrees and masters to date in the field that I'm in. So yeah, wear lots of different hats. I'm a mum as well. I'm a mum of two adult children, young adult children, and a wife, and yeah, absolutely a child of God. So that's I suppose, my titles. Yeah.
So you're very, very busy in your field. I can
Yes,
say, yeah.
yes. I am busy, but I like busy. For me, busy's good. Yeah.
So it's not always been like this. So just take us back to where you began. Take us back, maybe, if you like, through your childhood, or if not, if you want to take us from your education point up to where you are now.
Okay, that's a long journey.
Yeah.
So I'm one of seven. I'm the youngest of seven. I have six other siblings. I was born in London, England, to two Jamaican parents. Grew up in a typical Caribbean Jamaican household. There was lots of us. There were some good times, some not so good times. Lots of food, lots of music, lots of house parties. My house was the house where, you know, a lot of my friends used to come and stay. Growing up, I wasn't ever really allowed to sleep out at my friends' houses, you know, even like in primary school, secondary school, that wasn't really allowed. But my school friends, I went to a girls' school, my friends were allowed to come and stay at mine. So my house was the house where a lot of my friends would spend a lot of time. And some of those friends that I had or made from primary school and secondary school, they're still in my life now. And now they're my considered family, you know, they're not just friends, they're family now. But yeah, so growing up was a pretty much normal, average Caribbean household. I went to as I've mentioned, a girls' secondary school. That was an interesting time in secondary school. Made some very good friends there. I went to a school in Bromley, Beckenham, Bromley. So it was when I went to school, when I was at school in the 90s, my year group, we were like the first year group of a lot of black people. It was very kind of white area, a lot of white families were there. So when we went, it was a bit of a big shift. And when I went to school, I always had locks. So I had locks and I used to wrap my hair, was very much into my beads and stuff like that, my head wraps. And that was a shift for the school. They wasn't used to seeing that. So I was very, you know, pro-black at school from very early, you know, was setting trends and standing my ground and promoting blackness in a very white environment at the time. But school was fun. We had a lot of fun at school. If I was to think about myself at school, I wasn't naughty. I wasn't a naughty student. I was just very, stood my ground and was firm in my beliefs and my opinions. And I wouldn't be considered less than. Growing up at school, I felt that the teachers used to always try to put me down a bit, like I wasn't as good as others. So that made me always stand my ground from very, very early. Because my parents, you know, I grew up in a household where my parents used to take us to places like Devon and Cornwall and Scotland. In the 80s and 90s, it was somewhat racist, it's probably fair to say, but we were always brought up to say, we were always brought up in a way to say, you can go anywhere. You can go anywhere, you were born in this country, be comfortable, don't be made to feel that you're not worthy. That was always instilled in us from a very, very, very early age. My parents, my dad had a catering business growing up. He was a provider of the household. My mum was an academic. So I grew up actually in a household where there was lots of us in my household. As I said, I was one of 7, but I had cousins that lived with me as well. My house was always full of people. Plus, because I'm one of 7 siblings, my brothers and sisters would always have friends over. So my house was always full. There was always food, But my mum was an academic, so I grew up, I remember being, in primary school. My mum always had an office, and, I grew up finding books like economics books and psychology books and sociology books interesting. I was just fascinated. I think I was more fascinated in what my mum was doing. So I liked to, when she was in the office working, I would grab a book and read it. And then, it was a time when she was lecturing. School closure days, inset days, you'd have to go along with your parents to work. And I'd sometimes go to uni with her and sit in the back of the class and listen to her lectures. And I was fascinated because I used to understand some of the things that she was talking about. I was like, wow, how come I understand this? And I think it just interested me. And I think that's really what led me into the profession that I'm in now. I think I always had an interest in things like psychology, sociology, mental health. Fascinated me greatly. But I think, I was a young mum. So I think about how much I want to say. I fell pregnant at college. So I was doing my A-levels and I didn't actually get to finish my A-levels, which was quite sad because it was doing sociology what I really enjoyed doing as well as English. But anyway, I didn't get to finish and I stopped and had my son. And when I had him, I was like, okay, well, I didn't finish my A-levels. What am I going to do? I knew I wasn't going to just sit at home and do nothing. So I thought, okay, what can I do that will really interest me? So I actually got into nursing. I wanted to do something that I could do that would interest me, plus I knew I could always have a job. And as you know, being a nurse, wherever you are in the world, you're going to have a job. So I thought it would be quite sensible to do mental health nursing. So yeah, I'd done my mental health nursing degree. I'd done it when my son was a baby. When I had him, when he was, I think, 1, I took myself to uni. That was a struggle to get in, as you can imagine. I didn't finish my A-levels. So I didn't have all the credits that I needed. But God was on my side from early. I was able to apply as a mature student. And I got in to do my nursing training. And yeah, the rest is history where that's concerned.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow, quite interesting how you overcame the odds of just being a single parent and just pushing yourself into uni and doing what you actually love. Well, what about your environment or your just your general circle growing up made you keen on this issue of mental health? I know you spoke about your parent being an academic, but is there anything else that made you more interested in the mental health aspects of life?
Yeah, firstly, I must say I wasn't a single parent. With my children's dad. So I wasn't parenting on my own. I had him from the beginning, which was great, praise God. I think it's probably fair to say there were people around me who were suffering with their mental health. I didn't know it at the time when I was 10 and 11 and 12. I didn't know that, but there were people around me who were suffering, which I later came to realise. But I think a really significant point for me was, I can remember I must have been about 10, and I was in Brixton Market with my mum doing shopping, as we used to do, you know, go shopping every Saturday morning. And I can remember getting into the car going to get in the car with my mum. She was loading the car with her shopping. And there was this lady, and clearly she had something going on from a mental health perspective. And she came up to my mum to ask for some money. It was a white lady. She was clearly pregnant as well, and she looked like she'd probably been attacked or beaten up or something like that. And she came to my mum for help, and my mum was trying to protect me like she was going to get me, and she wasn't. But I just remember thinking, what in the world has gone on with this woman for her to be in such a desperate situation? And she was talking to herself, and she probably was using substances, or might have been working the streets, but there was something going on from a mental health perspective. And I just remember being really fascinated, really, really fascinated. And it's interesting because I think back to that situation quite a bit, because actually when I done my master's, in the second year, you know, when you choose your options, in the second year I had done women's mental health. And it was really because of that situation, that experience when I was 10. I really wanted to know how, as a woman, you could get into a position such as what that woman was. What had happened I was fascinated, what had happened in her life for her to be in that place in that moment. That was my main reason for doing the particular topic on women's mental health. And I won't go into it too much, I don't think today, but you know, I had a bit of a interesting relationship with my mum, and I also wanted to understand a bit more about her journey, why I chose women's mental health as well. I wanted to understand how you can go through a particular life of turmoil and abuse and unhappiness and just various things, and get to the point that I witnessed, and then how that would impact and how that impacted her children, us, me. It just made me fascinated to want to study the mind. The mind is such a beautiful, fascinating, but dangerous thing. And I've just always had an interest, such a huge interest in people and relationships and why we are the way we are, and you know, yeah, it's always been an interest of mine.
And so you, did you work in mental health for some years, or did you have any clinical practice doing this before you went into the wellness consulting?
Yeah, I did. I've had 20 years worth of it, really. I worked 20 years before I stepped out and went on my own. So my last work placement, you know, doing your nursing, uni work placements, my last work experience placement that I was on was a child and adolescent mental health unit. And I'd done that for, I can't remember now, I don't know, 8 weeks or something like that. And actually it was that placement that offered me a job. And at the time when I done my nurse training, we were not like it is now, bands 6, 7, 8. It was grades, D grade, E grade. So when you qualified as a nurse back then, you would qualify and normally go into a grade D job. But my work experience placement that I was on, they were really pleased with how I was performing. So they actually offered me a grade E job straight away. So I completely bypassed the first grade nursing and went straight to an E grade, which I was really happy with because it meant more money. And I was a young parent at the time. So, and I had 2 children at this point, because when I was already a young parent, but in my first year of uni, I fell pregnant again. And but I'm a determined person. I was like, look, I'm obviously having this baby and I'm gonna just have to keep going. So I literally had my daughter, took 4 months out and went straight back. So yeah, that was a very interesting time. My son was about 1.5 at the time. Yeah, and I had this 4-month-old and I was still doing work experience placement. So I was, you know, we'd made a decision. I was with obviously my husband now at the time, and he knew there wasn't a question, I was gonna finish. So he actually left work. He left work and stayed at home and looked after my baby while my son was at nursery. So I'd, be at home, I'd be feeding her while I'm studying, doing my essays, and then getting up and going to a work experience placement that starts at 7 in the morning. I mean, it was mayhem. In my house, there's no pictures of me up when I was studying because I just was tired all the time. But God got me through. It was difficult, but he got me through. But yeah, fast forward. So my last work experience, they offered me a job. Took the E-grade job. Started off as a staff nurse, and a senior staff nurse, and a clinical nurse specialist. I spent some years in child and adolescent mental health units. Then I left there. When my children got to primary school age, I couldn't do the shift. I didn't want to do the shifts anymore. I wanted to do school runs because I could only ever do that when I was on a late shift. I never got the beginning and the end of the day. And it was difficult. I used to actually go to my first job crying on the train. I remember it was awful. People used to think I think people must have thought I was crazy. I'd literally sit on the train, having just finished breastfeeding my baby, and I'd cry all the way. It was mad because I'd missed her so much. I'd missed them so much. I just wanted to be at home, but I knew my ticket out was qualifying. That was going to be my route out. So when they got to school, I was like, right, that's it. I need a job where I can do a 9 to 5. And, if I have to do breakfast club, after school club, that's fine. But I need a normal hours job. So I went into outpatient child and adolescent mental health services. Done a lot of work there in a lot of years, worked in early intervention services. Done loads in the outpatients. And then sort of went up the ranks and went to become a service manager for a number of different services in London. This is all in London, inner London and central northwest London. Set up a lot of services in GP surgeries, done a lot of work around safeguarding, done a lot of work setting up services in CAMS services, child and adolescent mental health services in hospitals. Worked across all the spectrums in child and adolescent mental health. And then after working my way up, the next role for me would have been to be a director, really, deputy director of services. I didn't want to do that because I always thought I could be a director of my own thing. So why am I going to do it for somebody else? That's just the kind of mentality, I had. And I'd done really well, so I left in a good place. But then I moved out of London, and I was commuting back and forth to London, and it was too much for me. I was leaving home at 6 and getting home at 8, 9, and it wasn't making me happy at all. So I decided to leave mental health in its entirety, really. I'd touched all the areas, every single area of mental health I'd touched. So I was happy that I'd accomplished quite a lot and gained quite a lot of respect in the field. So I left that all and I needed a job that was local to me. So I went into a pure safeguarding role. It was a demotion, I took a step down, but it was across the health economy, whereas before I'd just worked solely in mental health. I took a post in safeguarding across the whole health economy. So I was working across, hospitals, ambulance services, GP practices, some of the local authority, care homes. It was a huge role, and I enjoyed it for a while. But it proved challenging, not in the aspect of the work that it entailed, but the people which I was working with. I went in London. London's very diverse. You know, it's quite multicultural. I had a lot of senior roles in mental health, but there was, generally speaking, always another black person. There might have been one or two black people. But the role that I took when I left London in safeguarding across the whole health economy, I was working with a lot of chief execs of hospitals, of local authorities, you know, of ambulance services, and in rural areas. And I look like me. You know, I've got locks, my face didn't fit the environment that I was working in, which is fine for me. You know, like I said, my parents taking us to places like Devon, Scotland, Cornwall, back in the 80s, and being the black people that stood out for me was good practice, because it set me in good stead when I was working in this particular environment. But there was a lot of challenges. I faced a lot of challenges with racism. It was very much in my face. You know, in London, yes, there was racism, but it was a bit more hidden. It was very much in my face, and me being the kind of person I am, I don't do discrimination. I don't do, you know, unfair treatment. I don't do inequality. I don't like things that are unjust, and I will speak up. And I've been like that my whole life, and it's meant I've not been popular in some instances, but so be it. You know, what's wrong is wrong and what's right is right. So I made a decision to leave. I was on my way out anyway, to be fair, because I wanted to go back and set up my own business. I'd had business before, and I felt like I was being kept down. I was being held down. I know I was being held down, and because I have, you know, I'm not being big-headed in saying this, but I've got a huge CV. I have a lot of experience, and it was being made clear to me that I was a threat in this environment that I was in. That was told basically to me. So I made a decision to just go back out and use all my experience today. I had enhanced my CV because I now had experience across the whole health economy under my belt, plus additional work across the local authority to add on. So I thought, okay, I'm going to go out there and do my own thing. So I set up my business, and I aimed my business to go across a number of different domains, but it just so happened that I fell into school, really. I fell into delivering services into school. And the work that I do is mental health services in school, so working with principals and the senior leadership team and parents and children, and help setting up mental health services in school. We know that there's a huge demand on mental health services for adults and children at the moment. So, you know, the service that I've set up, that I've been asked to set up in school, was to kind of bridge that gap a bit, in the sense of supporting the teaching staff, with not only identifying concerns, but doing training for them around mental health, delivering wellbeing therapy for the staff, because obviously the staff in school are holding on to a lot now, with services in the community being diminished or being stretched. I set up services where I do counselling and mental health assessments and CBT for students in school. And yeah, just basically helping some schools with that, develop their mental health and wellbeing pathway. So when I left my job, I actually handed in my notice with only having one contract. I had one contract and I had one day. That's all I had. But I wasn't prepared. I thought, I know my worth, I know my value. I'm not staying in this toxic environment. So I handed in my notice with one day's work, effectively. And I'd had 20 years of monthly pay, knowing how much I'm going to get paid, knowing what day I'm going to get paid, to one day.
It was bold move.
It was the scariest thing I've ever done in my life.
Any regrets?
No, not at all. It was the best decision I could have made for myself and my family, actually. But it was scary. It was.
So now you are a self-titled well-being consultant. Tell us what that is all about. What does that entail?
It's a very interesting role, I think. Each day for me is different. One day I can have a day where I'm just seeing clients. Obviously during COVID it's been online or on the phone, but I can be doing assessments, other mental health assessments, face-to-face or online. I could be doing CBT or counselling one day. Another day I can be in a primary school seeing, you know, tiny little kiddies or their parents. Another day I could be in a secondary school having meetings with or wellbeing therapy with principals or vice principals or Senkos. Another day I could be working in another school, working in the wellbeing department, writing a programme or a policy. Another day I could be supporting staff on the phone with safeguarding concerns. It literally does vary day to day. Yeah, it's exciting. I mean, I have a set number of solid contracts, which I need to have. Obviously, I know I need to have that set, I suppose, income coming in. But the work is quite flexible. And actually, during COVID, it's interesting because people say to me, you know, 2020 has been an interesting year, and there's been a lot of people being made redundant, lost jobs, etc., etc. For me, my business has grown in the last 6 months. Pre-COVID, it was just me. I was a one-woman band, sort of going up and down the motorway to schools and setting up business meetings to tell people how wonderful Sea Healthy Living is and how much of a great service I can provide. And people were listening and giving me a chance by the grace of God, you know. But during COVID, I've recruited 3 members of staff. I've got 2 additional contracts. Even I can't believe it sometimes, really, but it has grown by the grace of God. It has. But I think there's been such a big need for mental health services at the moment. There's a lot of people that are struggling at the moment, and even more so with COVID. I think there's been people that have been struggling pre-COVID, but COVID has just magnified everything.
I agree with
you know, the whole Black Lives Matter movement has magnified everything. So I think I've just been in the right place at the right time, and people have just trusted me and had a belief in me that I can help them either individually, their families, or help their schools. And by the grace of God, you know, the feedback has been good and things continue to grow. So I'm just thankful to God that He's been able to sustain me at such a time when things are tricky.
Being in the right place at the right time.
Yeah.
And I'm just thinking about the season that we're in the pandemic season. I feel that within the pandemic, there's another pandemic that's going on, the mental health pandemic. How vast or how deep is this problem from your perspective?
Deeper than we could probably go in the space of time that we've got today. It's huge. Mental health is a massive agenda. There is a massive agenda on a number of different layers. You know, there's a number of different people who are suffering from mental health who, you know, it's known about. It's a diagnosed issue. They're seeking treatment, and that's fine. But then there's another layer of people who are suffering with their mental health and it's undiagnosed. They're just living life. They're going through day by day with symptoms of anxiety or depression or, you know, emergent eating disorders or experiencing symptoms of stress, you know, post-traumatic stress disorder. And it's not diagnosed, but it's manifesting or, you know, showing in other areas of their life. And it's not until something maybe of significance happens, or they hear somebody speaking, or that, I don't know, that's somewhere where they're actually able to stop and recognise, oh, okay, I can see some of these symptoms in me, and then they seek a bit of help. There's also another layer, so I equally have a background in commissioning, so commissioning of mental health services, so I kind of need to be a little bit careful about what I say. I have a lot of inside information as to how things are done and commissioned and money spread and services commissioned from a healthcare perspective. And ill health is it's a business. Yeah. It's a business for people to be ill. It's in certain people's interests for people to be ill.
I understand how you would have reservations in speaking about that, but I think we need to speak about these things to a certain degree. You said that when you grew up, you were very pro-Black, you're very assertive when it comes to issues of injustice and inequalities. And I think it is a known fact that there is inequalities when it comes to access to mental health services for people of color. Would you agree that that is a problem? And is there anything that you would be doing in your capacity to try to change this?
It's a huge issue. It's a huge issue. And I think it's one of the issues why I had to end up leaving one of the jobs that I'd done, because that's what I was highlighting. I was highlighting health inequalities, especially across Black and ethnic minorities. And when you do that, and you do it professionally, eloquently, and you produce facts and figures and data, and you're in a position where you are able to present that information at high-level boards meetings, and you are then highlighting where things are going wrong, where money's not being, money's being diverted to the wrong places, or it doesn't go down very well.
Do you think that if you would have stayed, you would have made a difference? Do you think that you being in that position would have changed something if you persisted?
I couldn't have stayed. And I couldn't have stayed for my own mental health. Remember, I deal with mental health. Mental health is what I do through and through. And I believe solely that I have to be me, Celina. I have to be in sound mental health to be able to help others and do what I'm doing. And the job that I was doing, it was starting to slowly affect me. It was slowly starting to creep in and affect me, ever so slowly. And the minute I started to recognise that, I said, there's no job, there's no amount of money, none, that would keep me there to the point that I then start to suffer. But I think it's worked out though, because what has happened is, it's taken me out of one toxic environment and placed me. I didn't set out to work primarily in primary schools. That's not what I set out to do, or to have so much work in not primary schools. I didn't set out to work so much in schools. But it's happened that I've been called to do work in a lot of work in primary school and secondary schools. And actually, I believe I'm having a lot more impact. I actually believe I'm having a lot more impact with the families, with the children who are our next generation, our future generations, with the educators who are working with these young people. And actually, I know I'm so blessed. I'm blessed to be, my business, See Healthy Living, is in schools where there are principals who are listening. They are prepared to listen to the things that I've got to say around health inequalities, around educational inequalities, around depression and anxiety, around stigma, I'm being heard, and I think I'm being heard by the right people. So whereas in my commissioning roles, I should have been able to, my role, my actual role was to support the chief execs. That was my direct role, to support them with various policies and write policies and procedures, etc., etc. I won't bore you with that. And I was doing that, but then things were being omitted or changed or just nonsense. But actually where I am now, the educators, the principals, they're listening to what I've got to say, and their face then fits when they then are going back to various committees or governing bodies and presenting.
Isn't it interesting how that works? Because you're really at the source of the problem now. You're dealing with the children as they're beginning their journey towards the mental health and social inequalities, etc. But isn't it interesting that the same information is still being passed at the top, but it's just who's presenting it that makes a difference?
It's packaged differently.
It's a packaging issue, isn't it?
Yeah.
Wow. So I'm just, whilst I'm talking to you, I'm just thinking about the issue of the mental health epidemic, and I think the statistics say it's 1 in 4. But do you think that it might be even higher?
It's 1 in 3 now.
Just 1 in 3. So for people who are affected by issues of mental health, especially people of color, how, and people who are having trouble accessing this type of services, like your service, for instance, what would you recommend for them to start by? Like, where would they begin? If I say I'm struggling with mental health, my GP is not listening to me, I don't have anybody to speak with, where do I begin?
First thing I'd say, you need to talk to somebody. One of the jobs that I'd done, as I said to you, I left one job and I had one contract on one day. I had to find some other part-time employment while I was building business, etc. And one of the jobs that I'd done was work as a consultant nurse in a GP surgery. And this role involved a lot of different things, but basically people that were suffering, just feeling down, sad, or people with actual diagnosable mental health conditions would come and see me. I'd review their medication or, titrate up, down medication, refer them onto other agencies, or just be a sounding board for them, or just do signposting. And the thing that, I've been doing this for 20 years, and the thing that people always say, and they said so much in that year that I was doing that role, is thank you for listening. The key thing was, I just feel better that you've listened. No one's listened to me before. No one's actually really listened to my concerns, and you've listened. And so simple. Anyone can listen, So I think if you're struggling, just find someone. There's always going to be someone that's going to be prepared to listen. And, if I would say this to people that may be listening to this live today, you don't have to be qualified. You don't have to have 20 years experience. You don't need to know all the ins and outs of things to do with mental health. If someone wants to talk and they're struggling, just listen. Like, actively listen to what they're saying. And then there's so much resources out there now. You just have to Google mental health, Google your local area, local mental health support. And you can find, if you're the person that's listening to somebody, you can go online and you can Google mental health and you can find some numbers, to pass on to them. It's very easily done. So if you are struggling, don't suffer in silence. I always say to people, don't suffer in silence. You don't need to. You don't ever need to suffer in silence. One of the things I used to say to some of my patients, some of my patients is, especially the ones who were actively suicidal, I would always say to them, before you go to that bridge, before you take those tablets, just stop and think, who can you reach out to? There's always going to be someone. There's never nobody. You know, if I could, I work with a lot of patients who have either actively tried to commit suicide, or, you know, I've seen patients who've been taken from a bridge and brought to the clinic, and I've been the one that's there to see them. And, you know, one of the things I always wish I could go back and say to people that have actually killed themselves is, do you know what? Suicide is a permanent solution to a temporary problem. And when you're in situations, things can seem so dire, so dark, like there's no way out. That's depression for you. You know, you can't find a way out. You know, your back's against the wall, you can't find a way out, but there's always a way out. There's always a way out. There's always a way out. You know, it doesn't have to be the end of life. It doesn't have to be. So the job that I done in the GP surgery, I tell you, I treasured it so much, and I thanked God every day that I was doing that job, because it gave me an opportunity. It placed me in a role where I was actually, through the grace of God, actually able to save people from killing themselves. That's a huge job.
Huge
And
responsibility.
but so rewarding. And I was like, thank you, Jesus, for giving me the words and the comfort to speak to people. And I'd follow people up, so I know that they were doing well, or et cetera, et cetera. But I was so honoured to be able to do that. You know, just knowing that you can help somebody have a sense of joy again, or a sense of self-worth. And yeah, it was so rewarding. I'd go home from work and I'd say to my husband, I'd be like, oh babe, you know, this patient said to me today how thankful they were and all this kind of stuff. And he'd say, but that's what you do all the time. And I'm like, yeah, but
It's rewarding.
Yeah, do you know what I mean? I know I'm a loved person, but I still like to hear that I'm loved. Do you know, it's nice.
I mean, I'm just thinking about, you know, maybe one of our viewers is going through a time where they're feeling low moods. And this is, for intents and purposes, not to diagnose somebody through the TV or through the screen, but the people who struggle with low moods, and how would they know when to seek help? When do they know when it's actually depression, or it's just anxiety, or it's just a passing phase?
Yeah.
How would you advise them? Would you advise them to seek help, wait and see if it passes? Talk to somebody right away, because there's a stigma when it comes
There is, absolutely.
to acknowledging that you're actually not feeling yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. The thing with low mood is, you know, we all have up and down days. That's life. You know, the thing is, when you're having your down days, I have down days, but it's short-lived. Yeah, it might be a day or two, and it's normally circumstantial. Something might have happened, and I'm, you know, might be feeling a bit low, but you know, by the grace of God, I'm able to jump out of that. If you're not able to, and it's going on, and you'll say, you know, it's a week, or it's 2 weeks, or it's weeks, or it's now months, that's a problem. That's now you're gone into that era of clinical depression. Now you're not just having a few low days, which is normal. You're now erring on that side of depression, and maybe clinical depression. And if you are feeling low, it's important to go and seek help. Many people are sceptical about going to see help or going to the GP, and if I'm very honest, I understand that completely, and that's one of the reasons why I was really happy. If I could spread myself into tiny pieces, I'd have a bit of my service in all different domains, because I think that having somebody like myself, as in with my background and experience in a GP surgery, is crucial. And it's been recognised as crucial because the GP surgeries at the moment are recruiting a lot more mental health nurses of all different levels to be working in the clinic, because 8 out of 10 consultations are around mental health. Yeah, and it often, you know, people might present at the GP with a physical symptom, but when you dig deeper, there's something psychological going on. So if you're feeling low, go and seek help. and that help. If you feel comfortable, if you're comfortable with your GP, then go to the GP. But go to your GP and ask if you can see a mental health nurse, because many of them do have those in place now. You can speak to people online. There's so much online counselling services now. You know, you've got your Samaritans, but you've got a lot of online counselling services where you can have a free, you know, half-an-hour consultation, no cost, but you can speak to somebody, you know, on the other end of the line. That's really, really important you do so. You know, if you have a good friend or a relative who you actually feel like you can confide in, go and talk to them. If you belong to a church, talk to somebody in the church, talk to your pastor, you know, talk to the leadership team if you feel comfortable. If you don't, because again, you know, I'll be honest, not everybody that is within that church establishment feels comfortable speaking to some leadership, because sometimes people feel that they then will be judged by the leadership because of lack of recognition of mental health within that religious group. And then if that's doubled with the fact of being black as well, you know, and the cultural aspect of it, then there's the double stigma there, you know, so then they might not feel comfortable. But if you feel comfortable with a member in the church, you know, if it's not a leadership, but it's another brethren, just talk to somebody. The key thing is talk. Don't hold it all to yourself. It's the worst thing you can possibly do. Talk, whether that's, again, like I said, talk with church members, you know, talk to God, pray, just talk to somebody. Do not, I want there to be a caption, do not suffer in silence.
Yes. You mentioned that you're a Christian, and I just wanted to hear from you where you feel that faith and mental health interject and how they can coexist together in trying to find a solution to people with mental health. What role does faith have to do with it, if any?
I think there's a huge role and coexistence of faith and mental health. I think it's one of the things personally I'd like for mental health to be spoken more about across faith groups, because I think it's lacking. I think there's a lot more. Mental health in its entirety is spoken about a lot more now, even within our cultural groups, but still not enough. I think there are many people, or a portion of people who are, if I think about Christians, who are Christians who are suffering, and who are, in some instances, suffering in silence. I didn't start off in the beginning in church. I can come on to that a bit later, but I think especially for people, in my experience, I'm talking about my experience, people who have grown in church, you know, have a deep faith in church, hold on to that, and that's great, and that's right, and that's wonderful. But actually, sometimes I think people can feel, oh, because I believe in God, because I'm a Christian, because, you know, the word says, you know, all these different things about having faith and sound mind, etc., etc. There shouldn't be nothing. There shouldn't be nothing wrong with me. I shouldn't be suffering. You know, there's no reason for me to suffer in silence, or I can't talk to my leader, my pastor about this because it's not recognised, or they're just going to just tell me to pray. Well, actually, you know, in some instances, when prayer does work regardless, prayer does work. But actually, when you're praying for someone who is actively saying they're suffering, or you can see they're suffering, if the prayer's not working, then that means there's something else going on. Surely, that means, you know, you need to look at something else in conjunction to prayer. Yeah, prayer's good, prayer works, prayer's right. But sometimes, you know, if the prayer's not working, then it's not a spiritual attack. Okay, if the prayer works, then yes, maybe that person was maybe under some kind of spiritual attack, etc., etc. But if it's not working, actually, maybe they need to get some professional help.
And I think that's what God has given man wisdom.
Exactly.
For. You know, if you go to the doctor because you've got diabetes and you have to be on insulin, we do that obediently because we know that there is hope in
Exactly.
medicine. So when it comes to mental health,
Exactly.
it's okay for Christians to be on medication as an adjunct therapy
Yeah.
to mental health,
Yeah.
and be open with it, and not have the stigma that is related to
Exactly.
being treated for mental
Exactly.
health.
And we have to remember about, Jesus himself, had times of loneliness. There were David had times of loneliness. There were biblical characters who suffered from what we now recognise as anxiety, as depression.
Soul.
Yeah, soul.
Yeah.
Even autism. I was reading something the other day about someone else who suffered at the time, which now we would understand it as autism. There's different kind of things that was happening then, which happens now. So if it can happen, to Saul, to David, to Jesus himself, to Jehoshaphat, what makes us exempt?
Yeah. And Jesus, just before he was crucified, he was stressed. He was
Exactly.
distressed.
Exactly.
He was not only stressed, he was distressed. He
Exactly.
cried, and there was.
Exactly.
Anybody could have been going through that at that point.
Yeah. Yeah. So, there's lots of different things. And like I said, just because you're a Christian doesn't mean you're exempt from any of these things. From bipolar disorder, from post-traumatic stress disorder, from anxiety disorder, from eating disorder. None of these things, you're not exempt from any of them. Talk to somebody, as I said, talk. Pray, yes. Follow scriptures, yes. But seek professional help. If the prayers if it's not shifting what's going on, you need professional help, and that's okay. There's no shame. We all need help sometimes. That's okay.
So, see healthy living is not just one thing. You do give advice on different things: health, diet, and well-being in general. What role does diet have to do with your mental health or well-being in general?
Yeah, diet has a massive connection to mental health. So, see healthy living. There's really two parts to my business, and one part is around diet and well-being. I wrote a book. I'm a vegan. I wrote a vegan cookbook a couple of years ago now. So one part is around diet, and the other part is around the mental health, the assessments, the mental health strategies, etc., etc. But diet is key. One of the things that, if I'm speaking to somebody around who's come to me with either an emerging mental health disorder, or someone's just struggling with key things, the nurse in me will always talk about diet. What are you eating? What are you eating? What are you drinking? I always tell people, avoid caffeine. If you're having a problem with your mood, your emotions, your emotional regulation, avoid caffeine. Avoid these stimulants. Yeah, actually.
And then I'll have a sip of caffeine.
Yeah, avoid caffeine. If you like caffeine, replace it. Have decaf. Alcohol. If you drink alcohol, avoid it. Don't drink it. If you've got issues with depression, it's a depressant. Your mood's going to be worsened.
It worsens it. You think it will lighten your mood, but just temporarily.
Absolutely. Foods that are high in sugar. High sugar content foods. There's a link with, high sugar, cortisol levels. Cortisol links to stress. Avoid it. And when we, as human beings, when we are stressed, we do sometimes naturally want to go for, especially us ladies, around, the time of the month, we want the chocolate, we want the sweet things. It's actually the worst thing we could be doing for ourselves. It's actually the worst things we could be doing. I do it, I'm a culprit too. Yeah. I'm not trying to sit here. I do love my chocolate, Yeah, I love a bit of chocolate, vegan chocolate, but the high sugar content, it doesn't actually, it gives us instant gratification. And we live in a society where a lot of people, thrive off of instant satisfaction. I can't get my words out. Instant gratification. Thank you. But what happens is when that sugar level goes back down, you crash. Yeah. You have a crash, and then you kind of go back to square one, and you feel
you did
exactly
before you had the sugar.
Exactly. High carbs. Large intake of carb food, that makes you feel worse, especially if you're already feeling quite slow and sluggish and down and just not really, just kind of fatigued.
But isn't that the go-to when you're feeling low and you want to sit down with a big a tub of ice cream and just, it's satisfying for that moment.
The key thing is for that moment, and it's because of how we've been trained. It's how we've been processed. But actually, what we have to do is undo that learning. You kind of have to do all the opposites. Rather than having that instant need for that high carb intake or that high sugar intake, you have to actually do the opposite. It's not easy. It's not easy. It has to be learned. The same way we've learned these behaviours that we've got, some of them which are quite unhealthy, you have to unlearn them. And as a therapist, that's one of the things that I do. If somebody presents with, I don't know, anxiety, whatever the case might be, or post-traumatic stress disorder, they've got to a process through a certain pattern of learned behaviours. You have to then undo, almost rewire your brain to think, act and do things differently.
Wow, Celina, you are a wealth of resource when it comes to issues mental health. I know we could talk for hours about this, but we will give you some information at the end of this that you can follow up and chase, if you need any help regarding mental health. But I'm just going to change it up a little bit, and we will talk about your other things that you like to do. You love to sing. And this is not anything new, that you've done it for years. Can you tell us where this began? I think you've sung with quite a famous group once a long time ago.
I've always loved to sing. I don't know about being great at it, good at it, but I always liked to sing. And when I was 14, I used to be in a girl group. It's a long story, but I was in a girl group called Debonair. And we used to actually, it was 4 of us, and we used to actually go on tour. We used to actually tour around London. We did. People were booking us. It was mad. I don't know how our parents let us get away with it. Our parents used to take us, but we used to go on tour to like Luton, London, different venues, like comedy clubs, on the back of comedy clubs, and we'd do our little sketch. We'd have our little 10-minute, 15-minute session, and we'd sing and dance on stage, and we had fun, and we actually got paid. We was actually making... We were 14, 15, 16, and we were actually making money.
Famous.
We were actually getting money for it. And we had management and all sorts. Wow. Yeah, it was a fun time. It was a fun time. But one of the girls that was the rapper in the group, she went on to form a group with Flowetry. She was the flow assist. That was the rapper in Debonair. But we disbanded because there were 4 of us. And one by one, we got pregnant. So one got pregnant, then I got pregnant, and then a third one got pregnant. So the group was no more. And the one that didn't have a baby, she's the one that went on to be the flow assist in Flowetry. But we've come back round. We're still good friends, and we all came together and done some BVs on her album. And when she's done some touring, we've joined with her on some occasions. So we still connect, and we're still really good friends. But I've always liked to sing. I think I have quite a musical family. My dad's side, there's a lot of musicians in America and Jamaica. Siblings, my sisters sing. 2 of my sisters
famous
sing.
Do we know?
I don't think so, no, but they all do are session artists. So my dad's side of the family is very musical. Most of the family sings. Yeah.
I've heard you sing. You're really, really good. Is this something that you might think about doing, possibly an album, maybe something creative in those lines?
Do you know what? My first love, actually, I always wanted to be on the stage. I always wanted to be a singer. Mm-hmm. Oh gosh, when I was younger. My 2 things were I wanted to sing and I wanted to help people. That's just what I wanted to do, and I didn't know in the helping people whether that was going to be by being a clinical psychologist or a nurse. I didn't know which way it was going to go, but it was going to be a healthcare profession. But I always wanted to be a singer. But you know what? My confidence got squashed. I think that's why I'm not. I doubt myself with my singing quite a lot. My confidence got squashed quite a lot when I was younger.
Tell us about
that. It's really silly, really, because in my grown adult self, I just think, doesn't even make sense. But when there was one particular incident, and I remember, like I said, there was 4 of us that used to sing, and like I said, we're all still really good friends now. But we used to go to a lot of like auditions for things, and we had quite a few changes of people managing us. But like I said, we were actually making a little bit of money at the time, doing stuff. And there was this one lady I never forget. We went to this company, this record company, and there was this lady, this black lady as well, and we was all singing. And I can't remember, honestly, I can't remember the exact words for what she said, but she basically, I was always big. As a child, I was the big one in the group, the big one, and I had the locks. And she basically told me that I couldn't sing very well. She said, "Oh, you're not very good, are you?" And I think I was 15. I think I was 14. I was 14 or 15, and I was already a bit self-conscious because I was quite fat. You know, I was quite a fat. I think I was quite a fat teenager, and I always looked different to my friends. You know, because I was the only one that had locks, so everyone else had different. Everyone just looked different to me, and it really knocked my confidence. It really, really knocked my confidence, and although I would still sing, because we was in a group, I always felt kind of protected because there was 4 of us, you know, and I never really had to. We used to have our solos, but it was cool because when we was young and we was on the stage, and when we had our solo, we'd step out and do our solo singing bit, but I knew my girls were behind me, like we were just there, so I was fine. But yeah, there was always something that made me think, you're not that good, Celina, give it up.
You are good, I'll tell you.
Thank you. I mean, I appreciate that, but it stuck with me for years. I'm not going to lie.
I can imagine
it stuck with me for years, and to be honest with you, it's something that I slightly battle with sometimes now.
Still in the back of your head.
Yeah.
You hear that voice.
Yeah, but the therapist side of me can get myself through it. Yeah, because I can talk to myself therapeutically and I can be all right. But I'd be lying to say it's gone completely, because it hasn't. I'm okay with being different now. You know, I mean, that was always my thing. My thing was I'm always different. I look different, and, you know. But now I'm all right with that. I'm okay with. I've embraced myself. I started to love myself when I got married. When I was 27, I started to love myself then and think I'm actually okay. Yeah, but it took a while to get there.
So tell us about your faith, just in general. How has your walk been? When did you have a connection with God, and just how did that transform your life?
I have always had a connection with God. I've always felt the presence of God, but I didn't necessarily accept it, I think. When I was younger, it's going to sound really weird. When I was younger, I used to think there was something very different about me. I don't know what it was. I just felt really different. I can remember literally my mum pushing me in a pushchair and having these thoughts, which at the time didn't fit my 1.5-year-old body. I have memories back to like being 1 and younger. And I just always thought, oh my gosh, how comes I'm feeling these things and I'm thinking these things? I feel quite strange. I felt like I was too old for the little body that I was in. I remember I must have been about 3, and I was at this house with my dad, a neighbour's house with my dad. And my dad was in one room talking to his friend, this guy and his wife, and I think I wanted something. I don't know, they must have sent me to another room to go and get something, or play with a toy or play with the other little child, I can't remember. But I remember walking into this room. This is going to sound weird, but I walked into this room and I saw this woman in the room. There was 2 women in the room that were not in the house. And it's what I understand now, maybe as a a ghost or a spirit or something, but I saw this, and this thing was talking to me. And I remember running out and running back to my dad, and I didn't tell him because I thought, he's going to think I've lost the plot. I remember being 4 and thinking, if I tell my dad what I've just seen and what's just happened, he's going to think, she was just telling me to just calling me, come, she's trying to give me an apple. It was really bizarre. So I didn't tell anybody for years. And then when I got older, I realised, oh gosh, Celina, it must have been a little ghost or something in the house. The house must have been haunted. And I started to tell people about it, and it was, then that was that. I digress going to that story, but the point is, I used to see things that I think nobody else could see from a very early age. And I used to think, this person's going to say this, or this is going to happen, that person's going to fall over, and then it would happen. And it used to freak me out. I'm not going to lie.
Yeah, premonitions of things.
But I didn't know it as premonitions, and it was just really quite bizarre.
Do you still have them?
All the time, all the time, all the time. But now I think I have a different level of understanding around it. So
would you say you're prophetic?
No, I wouldn't say that. I don't think I would say that at all.
I've heard you made a statement once, correct me if I'm wrong, that you're not religious, you're spiritual.
Yeah.
How would you describe that for somebody who doesn't really understand what that means?
Because for me, I think I've grown up, you know, where my, I suppose, understanding of things around religion is, I think you can do things religiously without having any kind of connection whatsoever. I know people that have gone to church for 20, 30, 40, 50 years and do things religiously, but are the most spiritually dry people ever, you know? I'm not judging or criticising. I think for me, my way of thinking, I think religion, people might not agree with me, but religion in its purest form, I think, has been westernised to divide and separate people, which I don't think is right. I'm more interested in having a spiritual connection. I'm more interested in having a relationship with my Father than just doing things religiously with just
routines and
yeah, routines. You need routines and practices. I believe, of course, I believe that. You need to have routines and practices, etc., etc. But you need to have a spiritual connection. You need to have a relationship, you know, with our Father if you're a Christian like myself, you know. But I think, you know, going back to I think what you were saying about my walk, my journey, I've always felt like I've been, I didn't recognise it in these terms before, but I've always felt like I've been carried my whole life. There are rightfully, I shouldn't be sitting here. Rightfully, I shouldn't be actually alive sitting here today. I shouldn't be, really. Because there has been so many situations where things that not even my parents or my siblings or my husband or my children would even know about, where my life could have just
ended.
Yeah, I've had some really there's things people don't know. I've had some really dark days, which people wouldn't even know, but God, He's just carried me my whole life. And I think my dad's side of the family, I talk about my dad's side of the family a lot, I'm very close to my dad. But my dad's side of the family, there are pastors and bishops and priests and people that are very spiritual, and, you know, there are people that I would say are very, if I can say, are very prophetic in my dad's side of the family, people that I suppose are seers. Mm-hmm. So I know in my dad's line, my dad's mum, my auntie, there are many people in my dad's line of the family who I didn't know at the time when I was little, that I think, if I can say, they see, they're seers, they see things. So there's something in my dad's line, there's something.
There's a gift there.
There's something in quite a lot of my dad's side of the family. So I've always felt that God's been with me. It's my dad that taught me how to pray. When I was very small, I didn't go to church every Sunday. We grew up with Christian values and beliefs, etc., etc. I don't remember being very small and having a regular family church that we went to. I don't remember that, but there's other reasons which I won't go into for that. I can remember my dad brought me to a church where we lived. And I remember when I went there, I remember crying. I go in there and crying because it's going to sound weird again, but there was a priest, and it makes me shudder thinking about it. But when my dad left me there to go to like the Sunday school and whatnot, I saw some really terrible things around that priest. It was horrible. And I don't know why I was seeing or why all these things was coming to me, but now I understand. I think that particular person was not a very good person. And I remember going home when my dad come to collect me, and I remember telling my dad I don't want to go back, and I never went back there at all. But then when I was, I had my, as I said, my children quite young, but when I had my daughter, I went to a wedding of one of my really close friends at the time, and she came from a very religious Christian family. And so her wedding service was a whole church service, and there was an altar call. And I remember my youngest, she was about 1, maybe less than that. She was on my lap, she was quite small. And I went up during the altar call. This was about must have been 2002. And I responded to the altar call, and my life's never been the same ever since that. I'd had 2 children at that point, but I wasn't married. And I had a couple of years where I just felt guilty. I'd lived with my husband. We wasn't married, but we lived together. We had the 2 children. We were living as, what do they call it, common law. But I had this terrible feeling of guilt over me. I can't even describe it. It was just like, I just felt like, oh my gosh, I'm living in sin and this is awful. I found myself constantly repenting all the time. It was terrible. It was terrible. But anyway, during that time, lots of different things happened. I used to cycle to work. I should have died really. I was knocked off my bike by a 4x4. I was knocked down by a bus. Lots of different things happened where my life should have ended really, and it didn't. But I had an encounter. I received the Holy Spirit in 2005. I remember it just like yesterday in my aunt's house. My aunt, who's a bishop, she had at one point, anyway, lots of different things happened, but we ended up having a service in her. She has a massive kitchen in her kitchen, and we had a church service, and I received the Holy Spirit 2005 on her kitchen floor, and I started talking in tongues and all this stuff. I had, things that I couldn't have imagined, happened on her floor, and that was 2005. It's actually that year I got married. It was 2005, at the start of 2005. And I've never felt the same. I've never felt the same since. But then I went, I was going to churches, I was trying different churches, but I didn't find one that, I don't know, I just didn't feel home. But then in 2000 and, I don't know, some years later anyway, I found a church. That was my home church. That's the church where I had my water baptism. Was born again, and I've never looked back. I've never looked back. I had such a fire, such a yearning for the Lord. It was just immense, really. And I've never looked back. I left my church in London because I left the area, and obviously came and found my new home. Fountain Church. But God's just been so good to me. When I look back, He's just been there from the beginning. He's just been with me, carrying me my whole life. Do you know what I mean? When I look at the position I'm in now, it's but God, really. But God. When I was a young mum and I had no money. I had no money. We had no money. I lived in a council house. I struggled to even get into uni because I didn't finish my A-levels. It was by the grace of God that I got in there. But then every degree I've done since, you know, I got merits. I exceeded, you know, all what was expected of me. You know, I was able to buy a house when I had no money. Do you know what I mean? That things that...
Just favour.
Yeah, I've just had favour after favour after favour after favour after favour. You know, I'll never forget when I had no money and we wanted to buy a house, but it was like, well, where am I going to get this deposit money from? Like, we're working, but because I had children so young, I was adamant that just because I was a young mum, my children are going to have everything. They're going to go to private. What did I have, like private money and private nursery money? But I put my children in private nursery. We had nothing, but you know, I made sure my children went to private nursery because I felt that's what I needed to do to make sure people know that, you know, I'm not going to be a statistic. Because I was told I'm going to be a statistic. I'm going to have 5, 6, 7 children. I'm going to be on benefits. I'm not going to amount to anything. I'm not going to have an education. And I was like, and it was somebody who was very close to me. He told me that, someone who should have been there to love me and support me. And they told me all this negative stuff. But it's the best thing they could have done because it just motivated me to... I was on benefits when I had my children, but it was only for 3 years. Then I got off and I worked 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 and I studied and I worked. And at the time when I was studying, we got bursaries. And I remember the bursary that I was getting, they gave me a bursary of, I think it was £600 a month. And at that time, nursery fees was £500, £550. Each month I got my bursary, paid my nursery fees, and then whatever we made, we had, or my husband made, we lived on. And it was tough. It was tough, but my children were bright, so I didn't want them to be restricted. I wanted them to be able to get that education early. You know, if it meant paying for it and giving every penny we had to do, then that's what we done. But, you know, I digress. The point is, the Lord's been with me the whole way. Just the whole way, you know. We bought my house because a massive contract, a door just opened, you know. The Lord doesn't just drop money on your lap, but some doors just opened up. And the doors that opened up from this piece of work that we got, every penny of it was put aside. And within 12 months, we went from having no money to buy a house, couldn't even fathom where we was going to find the money from to buy a house, to, yeah, that's it now. We're on the ladder now, and we've got this start that we needed. So favours just followed me everywhere throughout my whole career. You know, most of the jobs that I've done in my career has been because somebody has seen something in me that I didn't and said, you know, Celina, you can do this job. I'm going to create this role for you. Or come and interview for this role. You'll be great. So I'm here now, not really because I chose to be in this particular role or situation. The only thing is I knew that I had to, as I said before, I knew I had to do something that could keep me in work. That's the only part of the decision I made. The rest is just, I've just followed the opportunities or the doors that have been opened for me, that God has opened for me, you know. Things could have been very different.
I really do admire that, because, I mean, I'm sure some of our viewers, some of the young ladies are looking at your life and they're thinking, how can I get there? How can I be like her? And I'm sure you have some advice, because somebody opened the door for you, somebody held the door for you to come through. And this is your chance to tell them something. How can you get your life to the place where you need to be? How can you start to live your dream life?
Believe in yourself. You know, believe in yourself. For somebody who I think maybe presents as confident now, you probably wouldn't believe how much lack of confidence and self-esteem I had. And I would just say to people now, just believe in yourself, have some kind of confidence that, you know, you can do things. And, you know, if God's for you, nobody can be against you, you know. So believe in yourself, just go for it. Just, if you want to do something, just go for it. You know, when I was, I'm going to say it because I was embarrassed for a long time. When I was 18 and pregnant, what did I have? I mean, do you know, what did I have? I had no house, no money, no nothing. But one thing I did know is I knew the Lord loved me. And I knew at that point, I knew he loved me, and I knew that if I just accepted him into my life, I knew he would make a way for me. I knew that. I had confidence in that. And honestly, that is, like I said, what has got me through. So if if you're a believer and you know God is with you, just have faith. You know, just have faith. You know, you only need, that faith of a mustard seed.
Yeah.
You just need that little bit of faith, and just go for it. Do what, if you have a dream, go for it. Pray about it and just go for it. Wow. Nothing has to stop you, not even being a young teenage pregnant mother, which I wouldn't advocate to anybody. I wouldn't, but
if you're already in that situation, don't give up.
Yeah, if you find yourself in a situation which is not
ideal.
It's not ideal. It's not an ideal situation. It doesn't have to be the end. It doesn't. It doesn't have to be the end. You can get through it. I did. Many of us have. You can get through it, and you can go on and do great, wonderful things, and be, use the blessings and the favor that you receive, and help bless others along the way.
So we've come to the end of our show. Thank you so much, Celina, for just gracing us with your presence. We really enjoyed talking to you. You are a wealth of knowledge. And for all our viewers, if you need any resources regarding mental health, we're going to have that at the end of the screen. And if you need to get in touch with Celina with See Healthy Living, please wait until the end of the screen, and then you can find some of the resources. Thank you for joining us. For those who have joined us on Facebook and YouTube, we really appreciate your presence. Make sure that you share this link and tag somebody that you know so they can benefit from this broadcast. God bless you, and see you again next Thursday.